Scryfall Tagger defines a fetch land as lands that sacrifice to tutor for other lands, and 50 cards have this tag. I'm gonna do a tier list of all 50. So starting at the beginning, we have Bad River. Bad River comes into play tapped. You tap and sacrifice Bad River. Search your library for an island or swamp card. Put that library into play. Shuffle your library. So this card is part of a cycle. Oop, missed one. Bad River, Floodplain, Grasslands, Mountain Valley, and Rocky Tar Pit. Each same basic pattern, but a different land. I'm not going to include judging whether or not one land is more valuable than another. That said, worth noting, it is a plains or island card, not a basic plains or island card. So it's slightly better than a basic land, and additionally, it comes into play untapped. So while you are getting one turn without the land, you are only getting one turn without the land. This isn't two turns without a land. So I'm gonna put these, lacking any other entries in our current list, as uncommon. All right, so next up, we have a one-off. This is Terminal Moraine. Terminal Moraine says, add one colorless mana to your mana pool. Sacrifice Terminal Moraine. Search your library for a basic land card. Put that card into play, tapped, then shuffle your library. Just before I move on, I'm going to do this in the order of release, and I'm going to start with the original printing. That way, I don't know, this is kind of what the card looked like when it came out. Just honestly, it's because I could sort in Scryfall by release date if I did it this way. So this one, again, you're not a turn off land, so it's good, but you have to pay 2 to search, and it enters tapped. So you're actually much worse off. Additionally, you're searching for a basic land. So I'm going to put this one notch below the original fetches. Next up, we have a weird one. This is Croson Verge. Croson Verge enters play tapped. Add one colorless mana to your mana pool. 2 and tap, sacrifice Croson Verge, search your library for a forest card and a plains card, put them into play tapped, then shuffle your library. Now, first glance, this looks like it's kind of the same as our Terminal Moraine over here, and except it does two lands instead of one. And so if I'm trying to look at this forest card and a plains card, it's basically the same as is there a forest and plains? Yeah, so it's basically the same as grasslands, except you get 2 instead of 1, and you can tap it for mana. And yes, it costs 2, but it actually ramps you. So it's hard to say, but I think I'm actually going to put this above the original fetches. It's close, but I think it's probably the right place for it. What's weird to me is that there's only one card that's like Croson Verge. There isn't like a whole cycle of them. It's just a one-off that does this very normal thing. And next up, we have Bloodstained Mire, which is pay 1 life, sacrifice Bloodstained Mire, search your library for a swamp or mountain card, put it into play, then shuffle. Comparing this to the original fetches, it's better because it doesn't come into play tapped. It does the same thing, basically, costs 1 life, but the difference between costing 1 life and entering tapped is huge. Obviously, this is the gold standard of fetches. There is no better fetch land cycle than the one that Bloodstained Mire is. And so we have our cycle of 5 original fetch lands. And these are the true fetches, the gold standard. I'm gonna keep going through. Maybe we'll come up with one that's better than them, but basically this is what everyone really means when they mean fetch land. All right. So next up, what do we got? We got Terramorphic Expanse. So Terramorphic Expanse is tap, sacrifice Terramorphic Expanse, search your library for a basic land card and put it into play tapped, then shuffle your library. So first glance, this looks like it's basically the same as one of these, except you're actually off lands for 2 turns and it's basic only. So already that puts it 1 notch below, and it puts it kind of in line with the Terminal Moraine. Arguably one or the other, they're probably in line with each other, but I think that because these are like, I think it balances out. So this one can be tapped for mana but costs 2 to sacrifice. This one, you know, you sacrifice it and you get a land tapped, so you're off 2 mana. Other than that, they're basically the same. Now that said, Terminal Moraine is definitely better, at least initially, because you can tap it at the beginning for colorless mana. So start there. Next up, we have a cycle. So the next cycle is the Panorama cycle. Panoramas say tap, add 1 to your mana pool, pay 1, tap, sacrifice Panorama, search your library for a basic of the types of the Panorama. So you got Naya, Jund, Grixis, Esper, and Bant, and then you put it into play tapped. So again, this is kind of in line with the ones down here. If you look at them, you say, okay, so add 1 mana to your mana pool, pay 1 to sacrifice, and it enters tapped. So this, yeah, compare this to this. Basically, this is a worse version of this. With the one exception that this, you're paying 1 mana, and this, you're paying 2 mana to get, you know, anything. And this, you're paying 1 mana to get, you know, a small subset. So I think that they're kind of in line with each other. So I'm kind of not sure where to place them. I'm going to start with them here and see how I feel. If there's nothing worse, maybe we're going to reevaluate that. So we got our commons getting full up there, so we might want to split that up soon. So the next is yet another cycle. So we've got Arid Mesa, Marsh Flats, Misty Rainforest, and Scalding Tarn. These are the second set of true fetches. So we put them up gold standard at the top. Basically, you can't get any better than this. The only question is what order you're going to arrange these in as far as what the better card is. There are definitely people who say that Misty Rainforest and Scalding Tarn, but I'm just going to put them all in the same place. So there we got our Mythic 10. Next up, we have a one-off. This is Evolving Wilds, which is quite literally just Terramorphic Expanse. So we're just going to put it here so that we can move these out of the way. And then put Evolving Wilds right here. So got a second Terramorphic Expanse. Terramorphic Expanse came first, so it comes first, but otherwise identical. Next up, we have Myriad Landscape, which enters the battlefield taps, can be tapped for mana, and we can pay 2 and sacrifice it to search our library for 2 basic land cards that share land type. So this is basically Krosan Verge. This is just Arguably, again, one way or the other, this is two of the same basic land cards, and this is any forest or plains. This one can get you, actual multicolor duels or those tri-lands or any of the various like really good forest or plains cards, and it gets two of them, and this one just gets two basic lands. So this is definitely better than this. I'm gonna say it's probably better enough than these to be in a kind of row of its own. But honestly, that's because it can be tapped for mana. Like that's enough of a difference to put it up a row. All right, so next we have Blighted Woodland. Pay one to add one to your mana pool, or sacrifice for two basic land cards and put them onto the battlefield tapped. So this is just the same as Myriad Landscape, except it enters and you can pay to it enters untapped and you can use it for mana first turn it comes down, but it costs 4 to do its effect. I'd say that it's very hard to decide which of these is better. They basically kind of end up in parity. This one is better kind of early game and late game. This one's better kind of turn 2 exactly. I don't know. Kind of one of those like turn 1, turn 2, or versus, have something on the field and then if it's late in the game you can search for 2. So put them in the same row. Next up is Warped Landscape. Warped Landscape, similar basic pattern. We've got the add whatever to your mana pool, sacrifice, search your library for a basic land card, put it in the battlefield tapped. So we compare that to these down here. It's basically a worse Croson Verge because it only lets you find, I guess, a worse Myriad Landscape. No. Worse Blighted Woodland. It's really hard to say exactly where to put this, but I think the fact that it enters play untapped and you can tap it for mana still puts it a notch above these, but honestly, I'm starting to feel like that might be not quite right. So put that in the rare for now. Next up, we have Field of Ruin. Field of Ruin, basically the same as Warped Landscape, except you get an extra thing, except there's a downside. So the upside is enters untapped and you add mana to mana pool by tapping it, so it's good on its own. You can kind of sit there and use it as a colorless mana source. You can sacrifice it and destroy a non-basic land an opponent controls, which is utility, really good utility. And each player searches his or her library for a basic land card, puts it onto the battlefield, then shuffles his or her library, which is a small downside in 2 players and a big downside in Commander, because you don't want everybody to get a card. Because of the utility, though, I think it's still high up there. I think even though it's got the downside, it's much better than at least Warped Landscape, because you get the untapped land come into play, but it's kind of mixed feelings because you're giving away something. So leave that in the rare for now. We'll see where we go next. So next up, we have Prismatic Vista. Prismatic Vista says, pay 1 life, sacrifice Prismatic Vista, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So this puts, in my opinion, this at the very end of the Mythic tier. So it's basically a fetch land, except for only basic lands, but it's for basic land of any type. So it's perfect fixing, except only the one time. So I think that it is as good as a fetch land until you get to a situation where you have a very tightly built, dual lands and tri-lands and that kind of stuff, and then it's significantly worse. But I think it still puts it in the Mythic tier, just the far end of the Mythic tier. So next up, we have Fabled Passage. Fabled Passage is Sacrifice Fabled Passage, search your library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. Then, if you control 4 or more lands, untap it. So if I compare that to your Terramorphic Expanses and your Evolving Wilds, it's essentially the same thing, but better. So we got a strictly better Terramorphic Expanse. But I feel like it's better enough that it actually goes up at least one tier, because now on turn 1, 2, and 3, unless you're like, you know, ramping or whatever, getting lands into play with other effects, this is going to enter tapped. So it's basically the same as, you know, Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic Expanse. But in the rare, well, not rare, but once you get to 4 lands, it enters untapped, essentially. It does one extra step of entering tapped and untapping, which is actually kind of cool because there's things that care about that. But it's only for a basic land card. So it's hard to decide for me where this is going to go. I think that this entering tapped all the time and this entering tapped some of the time actually makes it enough better that we're going to put it at the beginning of this tier. So move this all over here and put this right smack there. All right, so this is the kind of the gold standard of middle tier fetch lands. So next cycle is the New Capenna sacrifice immediately version of the Evolving Wilds or Panoramas. So I'm going to say that these are definitely worse than the Panoramas. Because they're basically a worse Evolving Wild, and you can't tap them for mana. I mean, honestly, one could start thinking about moving these Panoramas down a notch, or actually maybe even moving these off. Let me reassess this section here. So if we're gonna say that essentially this is a tapped land, but it's a tapped land of any color, and you gain a life, essentially is what it says. That makes it worse than this because add 1 mana to your mana pool, sacrifice it for a basic land, it enters tapped. So this puts you off at your kind of volition. And then this one, it doesn't enter tapped, but you get any card. So I feel like evolving, well, maybe what I need to do here is look at here. So I think I'm actually going to change this. So your hideouts and other Capennas are actually going to be here. And I'm actually going to move Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wild down a tier. They are a solid choice when it comes to fetching. Like they're not, it would not be a problem to run any of these, but if you want to compare them to other things that you could have, they're kind of the bottom. I think. Let me just reassess. So Naya, where did I seem to have lost. Where did it go? Isn't there one more panorama? Where did I dump that other panorama? Where's Bant? Get stuck behind something? Ah! Not sure how it got all over there. There we go. So let me look at this again. So mana turn 1, turn 2, search for a basic. mana turn 1, turn like 3, search for a basic. Yeah, honestly, I think that this goes down here. I think I got that wrong. Shift these up a bit. All right, let's look at this again. So only good mana on turn 2, only good mana on turn 2, only good mana on turn 2, gain a life, which isn't really much, and also you have forests and plains and islands, not everything. One other factor here, this is like an edge case, but the way I play it's not. If you have one of those cards that every cards you control are every basic land type or can produce mana of any color, that makes these so much worse because there's no way to get these to be an untapped land, whereas these, they are an untapped land automatically. So anyways, definitely a Terramorphic Expanse, Evolving Wilds better than Brokers, Grab Ready, etc. But only by like a little bit. Additionally, these are all types and these are a subset of types. So this, I think the 1 life gain is offset by this never being a thing that you can have in play and do other things with. So that's a readjustment there. And reassessing, I think that the panoramas are probably better than an Evolving Wild, even though you got to pay the extra to get it. You can use it turn 1. So turn 1, you get mana. Turn 2, you know, either get mana or search for this. Now that does cost your whole turn 2. It's hard to say. Like this isn't free, but I still think it's better. Honestly, I think that the more I look at this thing, I think it might be worse than a Fetchland. Worse than a Evolving Wild. Yeah, I'm gonna actually put this down here because you have to pay 2 to get that. And like, no, but you can tap it and put it back up here. Man, tier listing is not something that I am good at, but maybe I am. Who knows? Anyways, let's move on. Next up, we have Demolition Field. Now, Demolition Fields, add 1, sacrifice 2, and sacrifice Demolition Field, destroy target non-basic land and opponent controls. I recognize those words. That land's controller may search their library for a basic land, and you may do the same. So this is just better Field of Ruin. So if I put Field of Ruin up here, I got to put it next. As I mentioned with Field of Ruin, you've got a double problem here. So you pay 2 to use it, and each player searches their library for a basic land card. This one just says basically you and your opponent that you targeted their land searches for it. So these are not as good as each other. Like this one is worse in a multiplayer game. In a single player game, in a 2-player game, they're essentially identical. So that's where I'm going to put Demolition Field. Next up, we have Shire Terrace. This one is sacrifice, search your library, basic land, put it on the battlefield tap, then shuffle. So this, I mean, you're trading the utility of these ones for not having to have an opponent get a card, which seems like it's kind of in the same range. And it only costs 1 instead of 2, so it's definitely better than Warp Landscape. If you compare it that way, like, these cards are essentially identical, but this one costs 1 mana and this one costs 2 mana. So this is the order of these. Now the question is, does this go ahead of a Demolition Field or a Field of Ruin? I would say most games people are going to be playing at least 1 non-basic land that you care about, and in those cases, yes, Demolition Field and Field of Ruin are better. Is that every game? I mean, it depends on the game, but I'm going to say it's probably more games than it isn't. So I'm going to put it down a notch. So the 1 mana more to destroy an opponent's land is probably, yeah, I think that's probably the right place to put it. All right. Next up, we have Promising Vein. This is, again, a very similar card. This is essentially, is that just Shire Terrace with a different name? Yeah, I think that we have just another copy of Shire Terrace. Functional reprint. Yeah, so we got add 1, sacrifice, search for basic land, put it into play tapped, and shuffle. So yeah, that's where I'm going to put that one. Just to the right of it because it came later. So what do we got next? Oh, this one's actually kind of my favorite. So I called Fabled Passage strictly better Evolving Wilds. This one, it is actually even more strictly better Evolving Wilds because it's exactly Evolving Wilds, but with 1 more ability on it. Since I'm evaluating this as a fetch land, I'm just going to evaluate it as the best of the Terramorphic Expanse Evolving Wilds. But I think that the utility might put it up a tier. No, I think it doesn't. I think it's just the best of the basics. I think that that's the right place for it. Because I love Escape Tunnel, because literally you play this and you're like, wait, what's that? Oh, it's strictly better Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds. Neat. All right, so the next thing to look at is a big cycle. So I'm just going to highlight all these and move them over here to look at. So the landscape set for Modern Horizons 3, I believe, have very interesting templating. First of all, they add 1 colorless, and then that puts them in the warped landscape range, right? And then sacrifice to search, which is better than the entire section of these. They're basically a better version of all of this range. Now, do they quite reach the heights of a proper fetch land? No, not even close. They're definitely below this section. Not this section. They're definitely not mythic, but are they rare? Are they are they in this range? I think that they might be, and they might not be the worst. I think that if you compare them to like Promising Vein and Warped Landscape, having 1 of 3, basically, let's say a mountain, forest, or plains, in exchange for it costing 0, I think that puts them above the Promising Veins and the terraces and the Warped Landscape. So I'm actually going to move these down. Might want to move them even further, just for the sake of like not keeping places too crowded. I'm actually going to do that. So I'm sorry, original fetches. You're not going to live here anymore. You're actually going here. Oops, didn't quite get that right. So we got the slightly better tappable ones, and then Fabled Passage, and then the originals. And then we're gonna take this mess. Oops, grabbed the wrong one. And then we're gonna take this mess and we're gonna put it up here. I could probably fit that better now, but let me, not quite. It's just, there's not quite enough room for them. Let me do this though. Let's move them to the front. There we go. All right, so I think that's fair. And we actually have 1 more fetch to look at. This is the last, but not least, at least in my opinion, add 1, And then 3, and tap Sacrifice Urza's Cave, search your library for a land card, put it onto the battlefield, tap, then shuffle. Now, arguably, this is basically in this range where we're talking about getting a specific card, and then kind of in this range because we're talking about getting one of the like ramp or utility land. But I actually think that Urza's Cave might, because it's any land and there's so many good lands, I think that it's probably almost a fetch. So I'm just gonna do this, and we're gonna move these over, and then put Urza's Cave right up here. So this, it's so good that it's almost a true fetch, in my opinion. Like, yes, it's only 1 land, but that could be the best land in Magic the Gathering. And then you've basically won. And so that is my tier list. I bet if I spent a half hour or whatever this took and did it again, I'd come up with a different order. Let me know if you disagree with anything. I'll probably say, oh yeah, no, good point. But still, this is my tier list. Thanks for watching. And this is the first video I've made with this kind of like format, or kind of off the cuff recording as I'm going, moving stuff around. And this is actually my second attempt at recording because the first one didn't go so well. So anyways, thanks for watching.